The Middle East is facing escalating geopolitical chaos. Iran's missile strength is revealed to be far weaker than claimed, while a Saudi source insists that without a two-state solution at the 1967 borders, no normalization deal with Israel will happen. Get the exclusive details on the Houthi leadership decimation by Israeli strikes and the latest on the plans to confront Hezbollah. Let's start with Iran. There's been a lot of recent talk about Iran building up their strength and still having 2,000 missiles. But here's the deal. Iran does not possess 2,000 missile launchers capable of simultaneously firing 2,000 long-range ballistic surface-to-surface missiles towards Israel. Period. Iran indeed has an inconceivable quantity of surface-to-surface missiles, and no one claims otherwise. But for all of those missiles, thousands of them, to fly to Israel, you need launchers, and many of them. In the recent 12-day war, Israel operated from the air to disable two main targets. Accurate hits on the entrances to the underground tunnels from which long-range ballistic surface-to-surface missiles are launched, and accurate missiles on the launch vehicles, the mobile launchers from which the missiles were fired, and even on those that had not yet been used. Many of the mobile launchers were hit. Some were completely destroyed, and others they were able to refurbish. In the 12-day war, Iran launched a total of about 600 long-range ballistic surface-to-surface missiles. And since the campaign against Iran began, the maximum number of simultaneous launches was in what they called Just Promise 2, where 200 missiles were launched simultaneously. Now, those numbers are significantly far from the claim of a simultaneous launch of 2,000 missiles, and show that Iran's actual operational capability on the ground is much lower than the assessments of the Iranians. Additionally, there are technical limitations. Iran faces significant problems, mainly the destruction of the missile infrastructure, logistical limitations, a shortage of launch systems, and command and control limitations that prevent a massive and coordinated launch of thousands of missiles. Israel has cut out the top of the chain, and without it, the coordination drops. The rate of missile production in the manufacturing centers is limited daily and cannot continuously support such a volume of attacks as 2,000 long-range ballistic surface-to-surface missiles per day over time. But the thing that is perhaps the most important is that the chance that a launcher that has fired a missile towards Israel will ever be able to be used again is very, very low, since Israel will destroy it. Let's move on to Lebanon. When talking about the Hezbollah, the question is, when will Israel go after the Hezbollah hard again? So let's organize the information. Until, say, 2 months ago, the different factions and parties in Lebanon were debating for Hezbollah, against Hezbollah, but recently, voices heard from Lebanon are mainly just hysterical. Lebanese sources claim, and it might be an intentional leak, that the decision to attack Lebanon has already been made. It is important to understand this point because it's crucial. A very senior official in Lebanon are usually connected in various ways to American officials, and they ensure that what is expected next to happen is leaked. Tom Barrack, the American envoy, is pushing for the Lebanese army by the end of this current year to complete the disarmament of Hezbollah. Lebanese factions simply talk about the fact that Israel is currently facing a very large move against Hezbollah. The question of timing remains. When will it happen? Well, apparently it will not happen before the beginning of the new calendar year 2026. And why is that? Well, the Pope is supposed to visit the Middle East, first in Turkey, and then from there he'll go directly to Lebanon. His visit is scheduled from late November until early December. According to the Vatican, those dates are subject to change, but it's difficult to see Israel opening a campaign in Lebanon before the Pope leaves Lebanon. On the other hand, we are in the Middle East, and there is no moment of quiet here. A Lebanese source dropped a bombshell. He said, and I quote, "I will definitely have a problem with them, the Hezbollah. We, Lebanon, have received more weapons from Syria during the period since the entry of Mahmoud Ashara al-Julani than we received from Iran in 18 years. The launchers that came from Russia to Syria, including vehicles, trucks and such, are in our hands and have not been used yet. The arms dealers trade-in from Syria are all al-Julani's men. That's crazy. And it takes us directly to Syria. The one fully managing the Middle East today is, of course, the United States. Israel is, for all intents and purposes, the contractor for this management program. For example, Hamas in Gaza and al-Julani in Syria, and the list goes on. But let's talk a little bit about Syria. Al-Julani, who is known sometimes as the killer in a suit, is just another one on the list who will carry out the U.S. instructions in Syria. But what the Americans do not know, or more accurately, that a miscalculation in the White House could lead to regional disaster. Since al-Julani manages only a small part of Syria, in most areas of Syria there is governmental chaos, and it is managed by gangs and heads of small organizations that support al-Julani today, but will support other terrorist organizations tomorrow. I mean, what do you think? That Israel is rushing to a normalization agreement with Syria because Donald Trump and the White House decided? Absolutely not. This is why Israel is working to reach a security agreement within a fractured Syria. At least through this, Israel ensures itself military freedom of action and continues to hold on to the Golan Heights, including the parts we took from Syria and the peak of the Hermon. Everything that is happening in the U.S. with the arrival of Julani is a show. Don't be confused. He can wear a $2,000 suit and he can receive lessons in Western mannerisms, which in fact he did, from American representatives, but nothing will change who he is, his opinions, or his religion. In his recent visit to the White House, Syrian Foreign Ministry said that President Ahmad al-Shara held an official and first of its kind visit to the White House, accompanied by Foreign Minister Asad al-Shibani, and the US President Donald Trump received him in a historic meeting that lasted for more than an hour in a friendly and constructive atmosphere. By the way, you might have all noticed the thing that went viral of Donald Trump giving him perfume and talking about his multiple wives and so on. That was a bit embarrassing because supposedly only has one, but Trump was making fun of it that in Islam you can have more wives. But anyways, if you didn't see it, you can go look for it. Trump expressed his appreciation for the new Syrian leadership and the Syrian people and emphasized the U.S. willingness to provide the necessary support for the success of the reconstruction and development of Syria. It was reported that under Trump's guidance, an expanded working meeting was held with the participation of the Syrian Foreign Minister, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan to follow up on what was agreed upon and set clear implementation mechanisms. They agreed to continue implementing their March 10th agreement for the integration of Kurdish forces into state institutions. We'll talk about that in a moment. The American side expressed support for reaching a security agreement with Israel aimed at strengthening regional stability. But let's hear from Mahmoud Ashara, president of Syria. In his interview with the Washington Post, he says, Israel conquered the Golan Heights to protect Israeli territory. Now they are imposing conditions on southern Syria. In 10 years, perhaps they will want to conquer central Syria to protect southern Syria. And that is how they will reach Munich in Europe, in Germany. Israel has advanced into Syrian territory not out of security concerns, but out of a desire for geographical expansion. For us to hold direct negotiations with Israel, it must withdraw to the December 8th, 2024 lines, that is, when the Bashar al-Assad regime fell. The US is with us on this, and President Trump supports our position. Israel carried out more than 1,000 attacks in Syrian territory since December 12th, and has also attacked the presidential palace and the Ministry of Defense. We did not respond because we want to rebuild Syria. I don't think he is a fan of Israel. A very interesting report that on November 14th in the evening, 2 Grad rockets, 107 millimeter, were launched from the Kfar Suesa area in South Damascus towards the Al-Mazah neighborhood in West Damascus. The rockets hit what's known as Area 86 and the Asadi Hospital in Al-Mazah. This is about 3 kilometers from the launch site. On the western and northern border of Al-Mazah are 2 presidential complexes. The hits were relatively close to the secondary presidential complex. Asadi Hospital, where one of the rockets hit, is about 130 meters from this complex. Area 86, where the second rocket hit, is about 600 meters from this complex. Both hits were relatively large distances from the central presidential complex. It should be noted that the area west of Al-Mazah is known as an area with a number of military bases. At this stage, no responsibility has been claimed for the fire-in. Is ISIS behind the rocket fire? After Ashara visited the United States, ISIS publicly defined him as a traitor and a slave of the West and the Jews. ISIS called on al-Julani's disappointed supporters to abandon him and join ISIS. The risk level for President Ashara and his regime is rising. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we'll talk about this, in recent clashes and violence between Syrian forces, which are involved with the transitional government and often include elements of Sunni hardliners, jihadists, or Bedouin tribals with affiliation to the al-Julani regime, are as follows. In the Druze area in Sveda, heavy clashes erupted in mid-November between local Druze National Guard forces and government-affiliated internal security forces, violating the July ceasefire. Both sides reported casualties from the intense fighting, which include mortar fire and drones. The Alawite community is under an ongoing threat, and recent reports confirm a cycle of sectarian revenge killings is going on, targeting Alawite civilians and alleged Assadist informers. Meanwhile, the Kurdish forces have engaged in renewed, albeit localized, fire exchanges with government-aligned military elements near Raqqa in this month, and it's illustrating the continued breakdown of this ceasefire agreement and the attempts to integrate the different groups into a centralized government. Let's move on to Yemen. A very interesting Yemeni source said the following. Several Houthi facilities have been built into the Hodeidah port, in which weapons and Iranian personnel arrive. Satellite photos are supporting this statement, and it includes construction of new docks in the Ras Isa and Al Salif port areas, which have already been attacked several times by the IDF. But even more interesting than that is a report from a Yemeni source in Sana'a and in Aden, and it was in the Saudi paper Ashraq al-Awasat, and it stated the following. The Israeli attacks, which targeted highly sensitive sites and secret hiding places of the Houthis, resulted in the deaths of the Prime Minister, 9 ministers, the Chief of Staff, and several military commanders, have led to an unprecedented security breach. This has damaged the Houthis' image among their supporters and the Yemeni public in general. After years of claiming to be an impenetrable force, it is claimed that the Houthis are currently facing severe internal challenges, primarily the growing power struggle between the centers of power over rule and money, alongside increasing public unrest due to the expansion of poverty cycles. The sources noted that this set of factors has pushed Tehran to accelerate its support to work towards making the Houthis a regional military force that compensates for the imbalance in the Iranian influence in other areas. The source claimed that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps elements located in Yemen failed to cope with the consequences of Israeli penetration and contributed to the escalation of the internal conflict by proposing a plan to purge the Houthi intelligence apparatus, claiming that internal penetration centers are operating within it. And this is, of course, comes along that after the Iranians lost Nasrallah in Lebanon, they sent their highest ranking officer in charge of training and arming proxies to Yemen after a year of hiding him in Iran for fear of assassination. Let's move on to Saudi Arabia. It's been in the news recently. Saudi royal sources say there will be no normalization with Israel without a two-state solution. This is after President Trump declared that he expects to discuss with Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, and the source from the kingdom emphasized it has no intention of abandoning its demand. The Saudi source stressed Trump will not pressure us. It will not happen without the basic condition, that is the two-state solution. According to this source, the decision now rests with Israel. There will be no normalization without it, without meeting the basic condition we set. Trump will not pressure us otherwise, and even if he does, normalization will not take place. The same source also mentioned that the arms deals that will be discussed and were discussed between Trump and Ben Salman, the Crown Prince will make agreements for cooperation in the fields of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, an arms deal including the purchases of the F-35 fighter jets. However, he claimed that they're not solely dependent on the United States, and if they don't buy the jets, the F-35 from the US, they won't matter, they'll buy other advanced weapons from other countries. Israel opposes the sale of F-35s to Saudi Arabia, considering that in order to keep its advantage in the skies, Israel needs to have superior aircrafts. Now, there are those who say that it's not a big deal because the F-35s are basically a giant computer and they work on permission, and there are many different levels of F-35 jets, and when one tries to locally synchronize an F-35 with local systems that aren't approved, then it will not work. But another fear in Jerusalem is the leakage of information to Russia and China. And Israel's opposition is being expressed to the United States as regarding the sale to Saudi Arabia, as well as also regarding the sale of F-35s to Turkey. For now, that is all. Keep praying for the Middle East. As you can see, it's a crazy pot of chaos and stress that could go in any way and will explode at any moment. Please keep praying for Israel, for Turkey, for Iran, for Syria, for Netivyah, and God bless you all. Shalom.